several years ago, like 2007. I don't know how many of you were following me in 2007. Some of you probably weren't even born in 2007. I wrote a book. It's called I Sold My Soul on eBay. I'm not going to get into that here. But the long and short of it is I was an atheist. I visited a bunch of Christian churches and wrote about my experiences in all that. What you may not know is that that book was written for a Christian publisher, kind of an edgy, big quote hands there, edgy Christian publisher, because their thinking was it's kind of amusing that an atheist could go to church and tell us what you think about it honestly. And there's a lot of Christians who want to read that. So they wanted me to write this book. And so I wrote it. And one of the consequences of writing that book is that in the months after that book was published, the same publishers came to me and said, "Hey, we're publishing some other books written by like hip youth pastors and the cool Christians who don't do church like other pastors do church. And we're wondering if you will write a blurb for their book. Basically, we know you don't agree with them, but do you appreciate their approach?" And their thinking was maybe this atheist who was in the news for doing this sort of thing, maybe my blurb could help them sell more books. That was the idea. I did that for a lot of books. Honestly, would I do it today? No. I don't feel the same. I'm much more angry about all this. But at the time, I did really appreciate what some of those pastors were trying to do because I felt like they were trying to wrestle Christianity away from the more fundamentalist, culture warrior, political minded preachers. And they wanted to make it more loving and more like Jesus and less hateful. And I appreciated that to some extent. I still do appreciate that, even though those people are few and far between. So, one of those books that I blurbed at the time was written by this guy, Bruxy Cavey. I think his name is Bruce. He goes by Bruxy. It's a long time nickname. And he later became one of Ontario, Canada's most influential preachers. And I'm going to show you a headline here. You can ignore the rest of it, but I do want to show you this is Christianity Today. You can kind of see the spoiler here. Ontario's most influential pastor. This guy was very famous for several years. He founded a church called the Meeting House, which kind of billed itself at the time as a church for people who are not into church. Yeah, which is like the theological equivalent of girls saying, "I'm not like other girls." Like, yeah, you are. And so this church was also affiliated with the Be in Christ Church of Canada, which is an Anabaptist denomination. Like, you can't get baptized until you are older. But okay, it's not exactly non denominational like a lot of white evangelical churches in America. But whatever. It's a church that kind of caters to younger people. It's a hipper church. They actually drew in so many young people to their services, which is weird because usually you see the headlines of young people leaving church, but no, young people were flocking to this church. And it became one of the largest vessels in Ontario, arguably Canada, for spreading Christianity. So all that started coming to an end in 2021, like very recently. And what happened is that there were allegations of abuse against Bruxy Cavey. Those allegations he stepped down. He said, "I'm taking a leave of absence while my church looks into it." But later, he actually shared a confession on his website. It's no longer online, but you could see the archived version, My Confession by Bruxy Cavey on March 8th, 2022. It is a long confession here, but the important bit, at the core of these allegations, there is truth. Some years ago, I had an extramarital affair, which, okay, I don't really care about your personal life, but that's an interesting confession. And it's also interesting because that is very much not what the allegation was. In fact, the woman who made the allegation, this is what she later told some journalists, and I want to show you this. The woman described how she began pastoral counseling with Cavey when she was 23 and he was 46. This, for me, was not an extramarital relationship or affair. It was a devastating twisting of pastoral care into sexual abuse. Yikes. So at that point, that's disturbing. Bruxy Cavey, after that came out, he then resigned from the church. And to their credit, the Meeting House Church, which has other people there, they said, we're going to hire a victim advocate. They hired a woman named Melody Bissell. Remember that name, Melody Bissell. And basically, she's a third party. And if any of you have experienced anything like that victim, we urge you to talk to Melody, and she will decide what to do, what next steps to take, right? And that's a good move. I mean, people need to know they can go to somebody who they can trust in the months to follow. So, you know what? Good on them. They got an outsider to come in and say, talk to me if you have stories like this, and I'm going to figure out if we need to go to the police, if there's anything the church needs to do, if someone needs to resign, stuff like that. So in the months to follow, this whole situation got so much worse. Okay. So one thing that happened, Bruxy, there he is right there. He got charged by the police with sexual assault. This wasn't just an internal church thing. Now the police were getting involved, and they said, no, buddy, you did something very, very serious. Here was another thing that also happened. Additional charges of sexual abuse were also filed against this guy. So that was disturbing. Check this out. This is also from the CBC. Months later, in August of 2022, Bruce Miller, then the co-chair of the Board of Overseers, said an investigation into allegations against Cavey substantiated 2 claims of sexual abuse by a church leader. In a third claim, his actions have been found to be substantiated as sexual misconduct, Miller said, adding that in one case, the alleged victim was underage. Holy crap. So it's not just, so this is not an extramarital anything. This is very serious sexual abuse at this point, and there may even be a minor involved. So again, all of this is extremely disturbing. Another thing I want to point out here, if I could pull it up, I'll find it on here. The Melody Bissell, the woman who was the victim's advocate, she actually said at the time there were 38 allegations of sexual misconduct against a group of 4 former pastors, including Cavey. Like at the end of this, at the end of her work with the church, there turned out to be 38 allegations against Cavey and 3 other people who worked there. So again, all of this, it's so depressing. It's so sad. And where things stand right now is that Bruxy Cavey is on the verge of going to trial. I believe the trial started this week, or it's about to start. He's going to go to trial where he faces criminal penalties for this as well. So we'll see how that turns out. And I am going somewhere with this, so bear with me for a second. Melody Bissell also said in this interview with the CBC that the reason she's speaking out about this now and raising the fact that there are 38 allegations is because she's no longer in that position. The church actually kicked her out. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. I wanted to share this with you. What do you think Bruxy Cavey is up to these days? Because he's no longer preaching at that church. You know what he did. Take a guess. That's right. He started an online teaching ministry. He's still going at it. He actually says on his new ministry's website somewhere, he says, "Hello, friends. Welcome to my therapy. My name is Bruxy, and I'm a mess. But I'm also discovering that suffering..." Here we go. "I'm also discovering that suffering, especially from self-inflicted wounds, can be a good teacher. And I am learning so much." Like, I'm glad you're learning stuff. Now, like, go to jail or something. By the way, in case you're wondering, yes, he will take donations. So this whole time, all this has been going on, the church has been saying basically what police say all the time. It's a few bad eggs. Bruxy was a bad dude, so were some of those other pastors who had those allegations against them. But the church is fine. The leadership of the church is fine. And since then, they said, that's why we hired Melody as our victim advocate. You could talk to her. We want to be on top of these things from now on. But she's no longer working there. And the reason she left, she told the CBC, is because the church's own policies, she says, are making it harder for victims to come forward. And that's why she is leaving. She actually said, let me show you this right here. She actually told the CBC, I raised the concern that I felt it wasn't independent and they were vetting the referrals, which sounds pretty disturbing. And here's what she means by that. This is the website for the Meeting House Church under a sub-page called Victim Advocacy. This used to be the website you would go to if you wanted to confess something to Melody directly. You could see from the page, it's no longer found because it doesn't exist anymore. Instead, the church directs people to a new page that's under the URL, themeetinghouse.ca, themeetinghouse.com/report sexual misconduct. And I want you to notice one thing here. The Meeting House is committed to ensuring that our congregations are safe and healthy. Yeah. To submit a sexual misconduct complaint, click below to contact our independent complaint intake partner, Linda Lambert. And you might be wondering, trying to make this stop, who is Linda Lambert? Like, why are we not talking to Melody anymore? Who is Linda? And it turns out, here's a video I happen to find, strengthening the family in the midst of a crisis. You could see from the pause here, the person hosting this event is Linda Lambert, who has a bunch of degrees. She's a pastoral counselor. She's a marriage and family counseling with some company. But look at who posted this video. Wayne Fleet BIC Church. That would be the Be in Christ Church. That would be the denomination that the Meeting House is a part of. So what that means is that instead of talking to Melody Bissell, who was the outsider who could take complaints, the church is now saying, hey, we want you to talk to this other woman who happens to work for our denomination, and she's going to filter everything, and then we'll talk about what happens. So that means victims were fine with contacting Melody Bissell, but now that they have to contact her, this other woman instead, they're not talking to anyone independent. In fact, when Melody Bissell spoke with the CBC, this is what she said. According to some church leader, the church hasn't received any referrals or submissions since switching from having a victim's advocate to the complaint intake partner in April 2023. Let me repeat that. When they could talk to Melody, they were getting complaints. When they switched to this other woman, Linda, they haven't received any complaints ever since. To which Melody says, yeah, but while there were fewer complaints compared to when she started, she was receiving complaints up until the end of her time in the victim advocate role. So complaints were coming in until everyone knew they can no longer talk to an independent party, and now they're not coming forward at all. The church is deliberately making it harder for victims to come forward. Like, why would you go to HR at your company if you know HR exists to protect the company and not work in your best interest? As one actual victims advocate told the CBC, why would anyone assume the church cares about the victims anymore? And I'll show you one other thing here. There's an investigative journalism outfit in Canada. It's called The Walrus. They did a lengthy story on the Meeting House, and they spoke with a lot of former members of this church. And this is one passage that stood out. Many told a similar story of how they initially came to the Meeting House. On the surface, it was a fun and safe place to explore big questions about life and God. It restored or reinvigorated their faith. At the same time, they pointed to a culture of denial and gaslighting that enabled misconduct and that swept long-standing problems, even criminal ones, under the rug. And they haven't gotten any better at that. Like, it's a clear sign that the problems at the Meeting House, they were never limited to its leader, its founder, or a handful of bad eggs. Like the entire church is the problem. And that also means the people who still attend that church, who grant it legitimacy, who give it money, they are making it clear that they don't give a damn about the victims either.